So, Brian, let's jump into the run game for Notre Dame versus the run game defense for Virginia. And I feel like even though those numbers on the left for Notre Dame they're not great. That's not vintage Notre Dame. Let's just get that out of the way. But these numbers are improving from where they were. That I will say. And they're still a lot better than the numbers on the right.
Right.
So, again, this Virginia team is very susceptible to the run, especially when they run that 5-man box. It's just they get run on. And it doesn't matter really who you are, they can get run on. So, this is a very interesting matchup for Notre Dame. For all the people that are high on what the offensive line is doing, this is an opportunity for them to get excited.
Yes.
How's that sound?
Well, it's just kind of funny that we're now in the 9th game of the season, and I'm like, yes, they're not ranked in the hundreds anymore in rushing.
I know, seriously. It's sad, but true.
Last 4 games, Notre Dame is averaging 199 yards rushing per game. We have to, there's the context of that. Now, again, part of that is the fact that they went for 296 on North Carolina. In the other 3 games during that stretch against Virginia Tech, USC, and Navy, they're averaging 166.7 yards per game. Not great, still much better than what they were before. And so to me, that's where you got to get to, right? Is you've got to be able to run the ball. Now, here's the danger that I have for Notre Dame. The danger that I have is that you get into a situation where you try to force the run. See, what teams have done, BYU and these other teams have done, is the running game is a complement to their pass game. Because Virginia Tech's rush, I mean, look at those numbers, Vince. That is so bad.
Yes, it's not.
I mean, they're giving up over 200 yards per game, despite the fact they have some pretty big physical players on their defensive line.
Mm-hmm.
That's really problematic. And so, to me, I don't see how you can't dominate this matchup. I mean, this is by far the worst rush defense you faced. I mean, North Carolina's run defense is better than this. USC's run defense is better than this. Navy's run defense is way better than this. I mean, just the numbers are almost staggering for a Bronco Mendenhall coach team. In the last, again, let's see, 7 games, right? They held Duke to 110. Duke's terrible. They held Miami to 169, 4.2 per carry, right? Those are decent numbers, partly because both of those teams try to be pro-style teams. Miami kept using tight ends and different things like that. Miami wasn't really spreading the field the way they need to, and they tried to run right at Virginia.
Right.
And that's not where you want to be, because the one thing Virginia does well is the traditional just hard downhill runs, right? Like just a hard, quick inside zone, right? Those things they do well because they do have a pretty big as I said, they have a pretty
big and physical
front 4 or front 3, so to speak. And so that is something that helps them kind of be good. Where they struggle is when teams are a little bit slower. So, like, just to make my point, Mandy Alonso, who's one of their defensive ends, he's 6'2", 285. Jameer Carter, their nose tackle, 6'2", 315. Aaron Famui, I think is how you say that. He's 6'1", 300 pounds. His backup is 6'6", 280. Mandy Alonso's backup is 6'6", 275, and Jameer Carter's backup is 6', 305. It's a big front.
Yeah.
And so if you just kind of try to run right at them, they can have some success. Now, that doesn't mean inside zone doesn't work, but it's just be patient with it, right? Like I could see Logan Diggs having some big inside zone runs. In other instances, I think you really want to try to get off tackle as much as you can, because that's an area, right?
And that's
stretch
an area
plays where you're trying to create creases,
good. Right. I mean, they've done a good job of getting to the outside, I thought, in the past couple of games.
Yeah, and I'm not concerned about getting to the outside as much. Notre Dame's had success getting outside because they bounce everything, right?
True.
And that's fine, and that'll work against Virginia to a degree. What I'm more referring to is what I like to do against a team that is big, and we've seen a lot of this. So if you, again, back to the last 7 games, I talked about Duke and Miami. They gave up 392 rushing yards to North Carolina, 203 to Wake Forest, 233 to Louisville, 270 to Georgia Tech, and 385 to BYU. Yards per carry, 8.3 against North Carolina, 4.5 against Wake Forest. And you watched that game, Vince. There was a lot late in the game of Wake Forest just kind of running the clock out. 6.9 against Louisville, 7.9 against Georgia Tech, 8.4 against BYU. they're getting gashed. Now, what teams have done, like BYU, for example, had a lot of success running some inside stuff. But what they did was they were running like little T wraps, which is a tackle wrapping around, G wraps with the guard wrapping around. Because what Virginia does out of that 3-2 box is when they see you run into a side, they crash that play side linebacker.
Yeah.
And if you're running zone, it's now dependent upon your guard coming off to get him, and it can work. But if you've got to be patient with that zone. But what BYU was doing is they were using their tight end to come crash back on that backside end, and they were sending their backside tackle immediately up to the second level, right? And then what they were doing was they were wrapping their backside guard and tackle one at a time and just hammering that Mike linebacker, kicking him out, because even though you're meeting him at the same place that your combo guard would meet him, because you're meeting him on sort of a counter type of thing, you're actually working him out, and it creates a vertical crease.
Right.
Because the thing that teams have been able to do against Virginia's defense is to create vertical creases. And that's why, when I talk about outside zone, when I talk about, buck sweeps, when I talk about plays like that, the goal isn't necessarily to get outside. The goal is to stretch them and then create vertical creases.
Right.
Kyron Williams is brilliant at that stuff.
Yes, he is.
And Logan Diggs is brilliant at that stuff. And that's where Chris Tyree can plant and get through a hole and go for 80, right?
Right.
That's the thing. And you require a little bit of patience, because if they're, if you're just running right at them, they're physical, they get off blocks and they can make plays on the ball, but you just got to keep at it, doing those things. But the other thing we've seen teams do is we've seen teams set them up by using formations to spread them out, get them out of their bigger box, use the RPOs, use those type of things.
Yeah.
And when you reverse engineer your offense, Virginia doesn't know how to handle that.
Right, exactly.
And
that plays into the hand of what we've seen Notre Dame do well at times. And if they can go back to what they were doing against North Carolina, for example, and up tempo, RPOs, things like that, they're going to have success. And they're going to have a lot of success against this defense. A lot.
Mm-hmm. I mean, as far as advantage goes, I mean, this is an advantage Notre Dame. I mean, even with Notre Dame's season-long struggles, this would still be an advantage Notre Dame. I mean, even if we didn't have the last two games, this would still be advantage Notre Dame.
I agree.
This is a really bad. Now, here's the wild card. Here's the two concerns I have. Number one, Notre Dame goes 12, 13 personnel and tries to, they see that Virginia stinks at running the ball.
Right.
And it's, hey, let's go big and let's hammer them. That plays right into Virginia's hands, right into their hands, and not just as a defense, but also an offense. It's not where you want to be. The other one is they are big and physical up front, and Notre Dame hasn't exactly been a big physical offensive line. I mean, they were struggling to move around Navy's undersized guys last week until the fourth quarter.
That's true.
That's my big concern is that they don't come off the ball. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's the big concern.
Yeah. I agree, because if they just do what they were doing a couple of games ago, firing off, trying hard, running their feet, doing those things, they're going to have a lot of success.
Right.
And I guess, I don't know if this is my fear, but I could also see them not doing that and the running backs still having a good game. Because of what we've seen from Kyron Williams and them. But again, that won't lead to the same level of consistent success that you need. Oh, agreed.
Because North Virginia is more physical and stout than North Carolina was, for example.
Right.
And you don't want to put yourself into that situation.
Agreed.
I'm all for, actually, this is a game where I want to allow the running backs to kind of do their own thing. But if you can see, here's the thing. This is what makes Oklahoma's rush offense so good in past years. They're not great this year because they don't have great backs or a great line. But in past years, this is what made North Carolina's run game so good last year. It's a real patient run game that you've got these backs with great vision and great feet, right? Kind of get away from the more traditional runs of just downhill, power, off tackle, hard inside zone, and do things where you let your line kind of get some movement, let those backs find a crease, and then hit it. And when teams have done that against Virginia, it's been real successful. And that's who Notre Dame is right now. I mean, that's when Notre Dame has been successful. It's been those type of things. That works perfectly against them. Now, it works even better when you spread them out, right? That's the thing is I want to run into a 5-man box, not a 7-man box.
Absolutely.
Kyron Williams against a 5-man box is going to go off.
It's going to be nuts.
Logan Diggs, Chris Tyree against 5-man boxes with a guy trying to crash from distance is going to go off. But if Notre Dame tries to come out and go 12, 13 personnel all day,
right, then they're going to be in a 7 or an 8 man box, and it's not going to end well. I mean, that's just how it goes. I mean, Notre Dame's not good enough in 12 and 13 right now to do that this year.
Well, and it also plays into who Navy, who Virginia wants to be. I mean, that's when Virginia's still their most. They've recruited. It
plays into what they do well.
And here's what hurts them: they're trying to run a defense right now that wasn't what they originally recruited to. They originally recruited to a 3-4 type of defense, right? But because the ACC has gotten so up tempo the last, it kind of happened in a hurry. It's like Mac Brown comes in and he goes to what he's doing. Wake Forest kind of evolved to what they're doing now. You're seeing a lot of these newer coaches in the ACC coming in and bringing like these up tempo offenses, right? And Virginia, who had recruited to be a 3-4 team, now has 3-4 personnel, but they don't necessarily they don't have so they're going to have to recruit to a different type of defense.
Sure,
and that's so you don't want to allow them to then line up into the type of things where they're actually built for. And that's why it doesn't mean you don't go 12 personnel ever. It doesn't mean you can't use 13 personnel in certain circumstances. It just means you've got to have the same game plan Brian Kelly talked about against USC and North Carolina, which is your pass is setting up your run, your formations. And it doesn't always just mean throwing the football. It just means use your more spread sets, right? Get them out. If you're going to go 12 personnel, spread them out, mix it up, do some different things and see how they handle those type of things. Put your tight ends on the outside, right? And then, have your 2 receivers in the slot so you can run your screens and your quick game and then see how they handle it. If they want to stay big and defend the run because it's 12 personnel, then pull that sucker out and throw a bubble screen to Kevin Austin or Lorenzo Styles or something like that, right? Throw a quick outside look screen to the field to Michael Mayer, something like that. You know what I mean? And if they want to spread out, then that's when you can still hammer. I mean, so there again, it's like we talked about yesterday, Vince. There still has to be some creativity,
right?
What they do, and we just haven't seen that out of 12 personnel, and that's really one of my bigger concerns out of 12. Now, if you want to come out of 12 personnel, first play the game and throw a play action pass to George Takis, okay, we can look at some of those things, right? Because what you're trying to do out of that is what's important is if you really think that 12 personnel needs to be a big part of what you do moving forward, because you are so thin at receiver, then what you have to do is you have to spend this game really doing a lot of tendency breakers, right? What that means is Notre Dame has a very heavy tendency of teams can watch film and they can insert data into your computer about what Notre Dame does out of 12 personnel and have a really good idea that, number one, they're not going to throw to their number 2 tight end. They're a very heavy run team. They do these type of plays out of it, right? They're going to be a play action run team out of 12 personnel. Okay, that's what the data tells you.
Right, absolutely.
So that after that, it's okay. So what can we do coming into this game to say, hey, look, we've got to make sure that we're doing some things out of 12 personnel they're not used to, that they haven't seen.
Absolutely.
Do some more motions and shifts and those kind of things. So if you want to go that route where 12 personnel is where you want to go, then you need to make sure that you're just not lining up and just saying, hey, we're going to go, ace personnel or wings or, over person, just things that they've done in the past, which are kind of okay. And you're not going to throw to George Takis. I mean, if 12 personnel has to be a big part of what you do, then George Takis needs 3 targets in the first half.
Right.
Absolutely. And not like on little slides, like throw them on a drag, throw them on a seam, you know what I mean? And now all of a sudden Virginia's on its heels and now you can do what you need to do. So Notre Dame may decide that 12 personnel is where they need to go. And so I don't agree with it, but if they do, then that's the things we need to see them do to be successful in this matchup out of that. What are your thoughts on that, Vince?
No, I completely agree with you. I think they went into 12 personnel, or it might even have been 13 personnel against Navy, and they only put 3 guys out on a route. It was it must have been 12 personnel because it was the 2 receivers and Michael Mayer. And it was like, what are you doing? And it didn't work for me. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like it wasn't creative at all. It was just kind of a flood concept and a rollout. And we've been saying that I don't mind getting Jack Cohn out in space and rolling out. That's fine. No problem with that. But when Navy's dropping 8 and you put 3 in, you put 3 in out there to catch passes, it doesn't generally work out too well. So they need to reflect on what they've been doing out of 12 and 13 personnel if that's what they want to do, and just break the trend, right? They have to do some self-scouting. We talk about that all the time during the bye week, doing self-scout. You have a handful of analysts. That's what they do.
Right.
Have them self-scout you, and so that you know what you've been doing so that you don't.
Right. That's exactly what GAs and analysts are for.
Yes.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, that's what you hire them to do.
Yes.
And that's the other thing too, is if you are in a position because of your injuries that you have to adjust what you've been, then you need to fully adjust.
Yes.
So, okay, if we're going to be a 12 personnel team, we need to do that. The reason I'm not optimistic that's going to happen is because they ran a lot of 12 personnel last year and didn't do that.
Right.
They were very predictable. The
Their
reason they were
personnel
successful.
package is very
Let's be honest, Notre Dame was good last year running the ball because their guys were way better than everybody else they faced.
Yes.
Way
absolutely
better.
Correct.
And this team isn't that. This isn't that line. Right. You don't
They're
have Tommy Tremble blocking a tight end anymore. You don't have Brock Wright blocking a tight end anymore. You have to say, okay, so then we got to scheme a little bit more. Last year we could just rely on our dudes, right? And we could scheme around having better players. This year it's like, okay, you don't have that up front. Okay, so how do you handle that? So that's going to be the interesting thing, and the thing I'm looking forward to seeing what they do defensively in this game, because this is a matchup. I mean, you talk about advantage. We give advantages. This is clearly advantage Notre Dame.
It's look, I've hesitated to give Notre Dame the advantage when it comes to run game offensively in the past. This is not one of those days at all. Like there's no hesitation in any way to give Notre Dame the advantage in the run game offensively. Zero. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I just look. I want to point this up because this is just absurd. In Virginia's last 2 games, they're giving up, let's see here, 327.5 yards per game and over 8 yards a carry against Georgia Tech and BYU.
Yeah.
Now, and you say, well, yeah, BYU's a good running team. BYU, with that game included, is only averaging 187.5 yards per game and 5.2 yards per carry.
And where does that place them in the general scheme of things? It's got to be about midway.
But BYU, that's a very sort of top 50-ish rushing offense. 187.5 is 44.
Okay.
And that
better than I thought it was, actually.
That includes having just rushed for a season high 385. They followed that up, for context. They followed that up with 173 and 4.6 yards per carry in their next game against Idaho State.
Idaho State.
They ran for 111 against Boise State. They ran for 67 at 2.8 per carry against Baylor.
Okay.
You get my point?
Yeah,
right?
No, I absolutely get your point. Yeah. That number's helped out tremendously by one afternoon in Charlottesville.
Yes. They've had 4 games this year. BYU's played 9 games, right?
Yeah.
They are 6, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, they're actually, have they played 10 games? Hold on a second.
It's possible.
Yeah, they've played 10 games.
Yeah.
They've played 10 games this year so far, and they've averaged over 5 yards a carry in 4 of them. That's it.
Yeah.
And they've only averaged over 5.5 yards per carry in 3 of them. And that was against South Florida, Utah State, and then, of course, a big jump, Virginia. Their highest game before that was 6.1 against Utah State, 5.7 against South Florida, 5.02 against Utah. So it's not like BYU just comes out and does that every week.
Right, exactly.
It was an abnormal performance against a really bad defense.